Hi, folks. Great to see you all. We're going to give everyone a few moments to trickle in. But in the meantime, we always love to get to know our audience. So you will see a poll asking you about your role. We'll just give everyone another minute and then get started. All right, everyone. I think we're going to get rolling now. Thank you so much for coming to our webinar today, where after popular demand on this exact topic last year, we have decided to break it down for you all in a two-part series where we dive into the nitty-gritty with Adrian leading the charge here. It's great, again, to see some familiar faces as always and meet some new ones. I'm Valerie, and I am on the product marketing team here at Assembled, and in a former life was on customer success. So it's really great to see a number of you all who I've worked closely with in the past. I'll pass it to Adrian to introduce himself.
Everybody, I'm Adrian. I'm the workforce manager on the solutions team here at Assembled. Hopefully a lot of you I am not a stranger to, and hopefully we've gotten a lot of returning people happy to come in and learn more about capacity planning. Sam, take it away.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Adrian and Val. I'm Sam, and I work on our customer experience team here at Assembled, formerly of implementation fame per the slide. And I'll be here moderating the chat today and responding to everyone's questions and just making sure we're all having a good time in the chat. So feel free to post in there with any commentary as we're going. And then, of course, we have the lovely questions button at the bottom for you guys to submit questions more formally that we're happy to dive in on here in our presentation. So we're excited to chat with all y'all guys today.
All right, so great. Now we got a couple intros. I think we've got some intros going in the chat and the poll as well. Let's go ahead and go over what is going to be covered in our capacity planning webinars. We've split this into two webinars. One's happening today and then one happening in about a week from today. The first one, we're going to go over the inputs that helps you set up the demand that you're going to be planning for. And the second one is going to be your outputs and your hiring plans and things like that. So this is going to be covering a lot of the ground that we covered on the one from last summer, because surprise, surprise, capacity planning has not changed in the last 6 or so months. A lot of things in the world has, capacity planning stays the same. So we'll be diving into that, but the benefit of this one is now there is a spreadsheet that we will be providing afterwards, and we'll actually be working in it live during this, so you can see how things are kind of interacting. You can poke fun and make fun if any of my formulas don't behave perfectly on stream, and then you'll have access to this as well, so that you can take it, have this capacity plan for your line of business that you want to work with, and start messing with the formulas and getting set up and running. So the goal of today is, if anybody's really getting far ahead, they'll be able to take the capacity planning, get it up and running, and maybe by next week we'll do some fine tuning, some more information, and people might even have some success stories of using this and seeing how it's already helping them. So lots of goals to get into. I'll be talking quite a bit as we dive into this, but I will take breaks so A, I can breathe, and B, so that you all have a chance to ask some questions and answer some of the questions that we will be posing back to you. So before we get in, let me just make sure that there are no questions right now, and it looks like we are good. So let's jump in to what is capacity planning. All right, so capacity planning is usually done over a longer range, and this is a plan that is going to go over the resource demands, and then of course your supply back to them at the weekly and or monthly level. Now you'll notice in these slides and in the actual version that some of these screenshots are not exactly the same tool in every single one. And it is really important to point that out. It is because capacity planning is maybe the something that we do in workforce planning where a one size fits all does not apply. So any way that you go about doing it, as long as you're getting to that end goal and you are kind of using a lot of the structure and a lot of the thoughts that we're going to be going over here, you're fine. Don't worry if it doesn't look exactly the same, if you don't have the same rows, you don't have the same columns. Do what you need to do to get to the result that you were looking for, just trying to help guide you along the way here. But as you're going through this, some of the things you're going to have to look out for. You need inputs for your demand from volume forecast, handle time forecast, other variables, maybe launches, things like that. And then you're comparing them against your forecasted supply and headcount. So like a lot of things in workforce management, it's a supply and demand problem. We're just trying to take it at a higher view, maybe at that weekly view, and make it so we can expand it out really far and give an idea of what our costs going to be, what our hiring needs going to be, so on and so forth. It's really trying to simplify that down, make everybody's lives a bit easier. And of course, that means that the result is the plan that's showing how much supply you're going to need to bring to bear, and then any anticipated over-unders, the things that we really need to solve so that we don't have to come in and answer, hey, why haven't we been meeting SLA? Or even worse, why haven't we been meeting SLA for a long time? We don't want that to happen here. So I think Val's going to go ahead and kick a poll out, ask how everybody is doing capacity planning these days. I don't know if I think we have an answer there that's like we don't, which is fine, right? We're all learning and we're all going to build out from there. But feel free to jump into that poll and we can get a kind of a pulse of what the audience does today. But great, let's look at what I was talking about on the last slide in more of a visual manner. So it's great to see all the words, see what's going on here. But when we really break it down, it's kind of helpful for me to see where does this actually start to break down into the aggregate parts and how does that come back up to make the overall picture. So supply and demand, as we talked about, time range extends long. The version that I have here that we will be showing live goes out for 52 weeks. But everything has been built out, which you can literally just extend the columns to the right, and all the formulas, knock on wood, should just happily expand out to the right for you as well. And of course, we can walk through that if there's any issues there. And then the inputs here, we got capacity planning, workload, staffing, workload, volume, and handle time are your main contributors. Obviously, we're using Erlang C and other things to build that out. And your staffing, some of the big contributors there are your attrition and then your hiring, right? You start with a certain amount of people, then attrition happens naturally. This is not a bad thing. There's positive attrition. A lot of companies right now have been downsizing, and some companies maybe can avoid that by just letting attrition happen naturally and not having any sort of hiring to backfill it. So not exactly a bad thing, but something we need to account for. And then with having this capacity plan out there, you'll be able to see, oh, am I going to be understaffed at a certain point? And then do I need to start hiring in some people as well? We're not going to cover this side as much in this one. You'll see it on the spreadsheet, and you'll probably see it a little bit as we're going back and forth. And that'll be next week when we dive into that a little bit more. So we're going to jump into demand with the volumes and handle times. Let me just take a look real quick here and see if there are any questions that have popped up. Val or Sam, is there anything out there? Okay, we are good to go. So demand, contact volumes, and handle times. Remember, this is the second part of the, we'll call it like the tree of capacity planning with its roots here that we're going down. Great, so the volume forecasting. First things first, we need to have some sort of idea of volume. This is our incoming contact volume. We will actually go through and be looking at this in the tool. But the point of this is you need to have an idea of what you're going to need to staff against and go from there. Now, there's many, many different ways to do this. Obviously, in Assembled, we actually do a lot of this forecasting based off of the historicals that come in. You can take that and you can layer it into here. Or you can go through if you have more detailed inputs as well that don't get captured in other systems and plan it out, which is what we're going to kind of cover with some theory right now. So the first one here is your customer base. So if we want to go into detail here a bit and say, let's try to take it down and break these into its aggregate parts, the first thing that I like to start with is customer base. And the reason I like to break as much of this stuff apart, not just volume forecasting, not handle time forecasting, everything, is because then if you do go back and track your actuals, you can see specifically which part was off. It's really frustrating to go back and say, oh my gosh, we missed SLA and we were understaffed by 1,000 hours last week. And then you start to break it out and you're like, you know what? We actually were understaffed by 200, and then we had 800 more hours than expected in the need. And that gets us to the 1,000 hours. Okay, in the 800 hours more expected, you need to start breaking that down. If it's just, oh, volume was up, what happened? Why was volume up? Did we have more customers? Did they contact us more? What's what CPC is? Did we grow a little bit more than expected? Did we have a project that went over expected? You want to break these things down, and we'll show you through here in just a little bit, but you want to break these things down and then ideally go back and track the actuals to each part to fine tune going forward from there. So customer base, this is just how many customers you expect to have broken down by week or month. We're working in the week here. You're probably going to get this from a sales forecast, and this is probably a pretty privileged piece of information to be looking at. You don't exactly want to have your customer base out there for all of your competitors to see. There's maybe some industries where that's fine. You want to make sure that that is securely locked down. This is one of the reasons why not just Assembled, but lots of workforce tools don't always approach it this way, because unless you're feeding over another point of confidential information, it's hard to kind of infer what the customer base and the CPC is just with historicals. So this is why we'll do it in the spreadsheet here, but you get your customer base. You can see here in just this example, maybe it's 10 million or something. We're not really concerned with the overall customer base and its size, except that ideally we want to see that probably going up, week over week, month over month. But this is just to give us a baseline of all of the people that we could serve. Let's start to figure it out from there. Now, the next part is layering on expected growth. In this particular example and in the actual spreadsheet that will be shared, what's happening is just week over week, what is your customer base? And you just plug that information in. Now, since this is a spreadsheet, you'll be able to make your own copy, take it from there. You can layer on a growth, maybe say we expect to grow linearly 25% for the entire year, and just have it kind of bump up week over week of that fraction of 25%. Or you can paste this in directly. Either way, you want to make sure that you're getting that expected growth in. Unless for some reason your company is super happy at staying at exactly 10 million customers and you don't expect it to change, plot that in. Otherwise, you're going to be in for a bad time. So we got customer base, we got that baseline figured out. So let's jump in to the next part here, which is CPC, and then we'll go over to the live spreadsheet here. So CPC.
Adrian, we actually have a really awesome question from the audience
Please.
on the last one, if you wouldn't mind me interjecting here. Anna from Indy has reached out to ask us, how do we project for attrition and forecast around the attrition that is going to come that we need to plan around?
Yeah, and a great question. We will cover this more in the next part of the series, but a great question, and for multiple reasons. One is, well, you need to forecast for attrition. The other one is I love that you specified that it's a forecast and what you're forecasting for. If any of you have been on my webinars before, I hate when the term forecast is just generically thrown out there, because I'm like, are you forecasting, volume, workload, attrition, staffing, how many, alpacas you have? I don't really know until you tell me what you're forecasting for. So that is a great question. Basically, the TLDR is you can take a look at the amount of staffing you had at the beginning of the year, amount of staffing you had at the end of the year. You can mix in like the amount of staffing that you incrementally added, and then get that broken down into maybe your yearly attrition or your weekly attrition, and build it out from there. And then you go through there and you plug it in the spreadsheet as well. You can just put in a simple number that's 10%, 20%, 25% attrition, whatever it might be. And it's just going to go through and kind of figure out what that would be week over week. And then with a little bit of fancy formula, it won't give you like a fraction of a person. The formula will wait until attrition is about one full person and then reflect that. But we will be going into that in detail. But if you want to go ahead and click ahead, when you go into the spreadsheet and you make a copy, the formulas are all there. So feel free to get into those and even come with those questions or hit us up with those questions between now and then. All right. Great question, Anna. Were there any other ones that came in the chat or in the Q&A? Okay.
Yeah, we have another great one from Arpan. Why full-time employment occupancy percent and shrinkage percent is not incorporated in the capacity plan? Oh, great question. So essentially, are we budgeting for occupancy percent and shrink percent in the capacity plan, and how are we thinking about that?
Yep. Great. So in this specific capacity plan, it does not have all the bells and whistles in it. You can add more things onto there. There is a shrinkage percentage that is plugged into there. So we can hop over to this real quick and jump in. And you'll see in the weekly capacity plan, you do put in an estimated shrinkage percentage there. And that shrinkage percentage reduces down the total amount of hours that each person works per week. I have 42.5 in here because most people work about 40 hours per week in the US. And the 2.5 is the 2.5 hours of unpaid lunch per week. But the beautiful thing is you can adjust these to whatever you need and have it be, maybe it's 40 hours because you don't do lunch planning and your shrinkage is a little bit lower or a little bit higher. Whatever you need to do to make the model work for you. As for occupancy, another great one here. I have not built occupancy specifically into this. Effectively, it would be like another reduction of your staffing time by probably about 10 or so percent if you wanted to have occupancy of 90% or less. Something that we can add in, this is maybe actually good feedback for a next one. Or you can just say, you know what, instead of having 30% shrinkage, I'll put myself a little comment and say it's going to be 40% shrinkage because X amount of shrinkage, and 10% is my actual occupancy because we don't want people working back to back. Yeah, so great question and good feedback for me as I update this. And if you get into here and you make changes and update, I would love to hear about it because I am not the master of doing spreadsheets and formulas. I'll say that I'm capable of doing some stuff. Feel free to change and let me know how you work with it. And it looks like another question might be coming in. Was there another one before this follow-up, Sam?
Yeah, so it looks like one more we could chat through in the meantime here. So Ari reached out about how are we considering SLA or ASA in this?
Yep. Okay, cool. So great questions. And we're we're jumping just ahead a little bit, but I'm glad people are excited. So in the actual spreadsheet here, of course, we want to make sure that we are incorporating everything for actual Erlang calculations here. So diving in, anything in the yellow cells, and we'll cover this a little bit more when I actually jump back into this. Anything in yellow cells is a input that you as the end user would need to adjust. Everything that's yellow in here are just placeholder values that I've plugged in to give examples today. But you can see SLA, and now I've set for this example a pretty high SLA target of 95%. Yours is probably going to be lower than that. And then your first response, so your average speed of answer that you are targeting towards is basically, I want 95% of the customers to not have to wait longer than 20 seconds. This is a very aggressive SLA target at 95-20. You can obviously change that from there, but that does help out. And actually this sheet is doing Erlang calculations for all of the volume for every single hour over the entire 52-week period and then summing it up. So this is not an estimated one. Over on the volume arrival pattern, which we'll jump into, you set kind of the arrival patterns that you are expecting for this line of business. And then the sheet does all the calculations for you. Literally, what's 24 times 365? Every single one of those intervals is calculated on the fly as you adjust inputs. So it's there for you. And it looks like the chat or Q&A is going a little crazy, which is great. Are there some other questions that I can answer?
Yeah, we have another batch of really great ones. Maggie reached out with, how do you deal with staffing with skill-based routing or multimedia handling as Erlang doesn't give accurate results? So parsing through that, I'm kind of thinking through how do we deal with staffing on a basis that's more bucketed out versus just holistically?
Yeah, great question. This one is specifically going to be going over Erlang C, some more of the traditional ones. And it's basically replacing with whatever is the most correct demand formula for those types of businesses. I know I said that I was going to go into this a little bit later, but one of the ways that I've done this in multi-environments before, multi-skill environments where you've got something that's a little bit blended, is instead of just having one queue and then your staffing bumped up against that, what I will do, and what I have done before, I'm not saying that this is perfect, is that you go through and you can set up Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, have the workload, because this is the output we're looking for here, like the workload hours, sum up to the top. Now, this is using Erlang C, so there can be some changes there. Sum up to the top. So maybe Q1 is 486 hours and Q2 is 190 hours, or so on and so forth. You sum those up to the top, and then you plot your staffing against that and look for any deficits or any surplus there. It's not perfect, but then it takes into account each one of those contact types, the specific workload needed for those, sums it up for you, and you can plan against that. This is going to give you that ballpark, that close for the weekly view, so that you can get there. And then when you actually get into assembled and you dive in from there, then you'll actually be able to do capacity splitting. This is something that we've rolled out with a little bit more advanced capacity splitting for your agents, and mock them up against that. So not a super, super sharp, concrete answer there, but I hope that answers enough of there that once again, we'll choose your own adventure and do as best as we can for our lines of business. And I've seen a lot more come in. Are there some more questions?
Yeah, one last question. I have a feeling this is kind of under the choose your own adventure umbrella. So excited to get the chance to dive in here further. So does this sheet bake in an efficiency increase assumption, or is there a way you would recommend going about doing that?
Yeah. So I think it's from Pascal, right? Pascal, if I understand correctly, this is efficiency increasing. So basically, if I'm going to put that into my words or something here, your average handle time basically going down. So in this sheet, your average handle time can be adjusted week over week. So there you can get into the age-old question of, should I be planning my staffing plans on the observed average handle time that I've been seeing, or on the planned average handle time, the goal that I want people to get to? There's great arguments for both. Ideally, you'd have both and see the delta, and you can go to your leadership and say, hey, our goal is 800 seconds, but it's been running 850 seconds, and here's what it's costing us in workloads. We need to optimize that down. But right here, since this is a week over week view, you can change your baseline, your seasonality modifiers onto your handle times. And if you did pack in some sort of reductions, you can lower it down from there. It's not going to do this automatically for you, but since this is all based in the spreadsheet, if you had some sort of, we expect to reduce by 15% over the next 6 months, it's not hard to plug that in as a formula, lay it into here, and then you'll see your workload go down as that drops as well. So I hope that answers it as well. There may be a secondary part on efficiency getting better during new hires and things like that. I've kind of worked around that with just the amount of hours a new hire would contribute per week. But these are things that we can always talk about and add in, or as you get your own copy, you can change it up too. And I know, Sam, you said that might have been the last one, but I think I saw some more things come in. So I'm happy to field some more questions if there's some more interest.
Yeah, one more here. Coming in from Heather. Do you have any tips for managing capacity planning at a company that offers unlimited PTO?
Yes. That's a tricky one. Okay. So when it comes to unlimited PTO, what I'm going to guess, and feel free to chime in the questions or in the chat, that you are probably more worried about the shrinkage being a little, it's hard to figure out what the shrinkage is going to be overall. In this view, the shrinkage is set as a 30% or whatever it's going to be that you're trying to optimize towards. And when it comes down to the unlimited PTO, unless there is truly some sort of forcing function to prevent people from requesting off, where it's unlimited in your bucket, but we still can't allow more than X amount of our overall staffing. Maybe it's 5% of our staffing every day or every week to be off. Unless there is that sort of stop loss function there, you're just going to have to go with the best of what your averages are. And maybe those averages are going to be something that you need to look at historically and get a seasonality of shrinkage, because probably your November, December, January-ish is going to be way higher. Maybe the middle of the summer too is going to be way higher. This is set at a static 30%, but because it's your spreadsheet that you'll have, Heather, you can go in here and you can change any of these shrinkage week over week to whatever percent you want. It doesn't have to equal exactly what was in here before, and it'll cascade down, or you can adjust. So those are my suggestions there. Unfortunately, that is where the art of workforce planning comes in a little bit more versus the science is you've got to do your best and then adjust. If it's not right, you make adjustments, call out why you adjusted, what the change was, and go from there. All right. Any other ones before I jump back into my pre-scheduled stuff?
I think that we are. Oh, wait, did one more just come in? One from Rachel. In the CAP plan, does Erlang run hoops from the volume arrival tab, i.e., no arrival percent on Saturdays and Sundays, not open on those days?
You guys are just taking away all of my surprise announcements for later on by asking these great questions. Rachel, that is exactly what it does. The volume arrival here is to literally say, only do Erlang for these intervals. And it actually, the math is taking, without going too nerdy, the math is taking specifically the volume for each week and then splitting it over this arrival pattern. It's not 0%, it's 0.08%. Splitting it over this percentage. So Saturday, Sundays get none, and the evenings get none as well. And then doing Erlang on each one of those intervals and then applying it forward. So you are spot on. That is exactly what it does. You set your hours of operation and then you set your arrival patterns in there as well. So great question. Yeah, you're all taking away my thunder here, but you're asking great questions. So I love it.
Adrian, and if I might drop in one last one, and I do think this will be the last one here, but does the model work for universal employee concepts with supporting an omni-channel queue and a contact center? And reading between the lines on this question, I'm kind of assuming that this is referring to a model where a support agent is answering multiple channels out of the same queue. So kind of that omni-channel work.
Yep. So I'm going to go back to the same thing that I had said before. This specific example, because it is something to get you started and going, isn't going to grab that. And I'm also going to preface this with, I am not a statistician. My son is in high school, and the math that he is doing now is much more advanced than I am able to do. So we are working with what we have here. But how I've done this before, what I was saying is that for omni-channel, if somebody is answering multiple channels at once, they're probably not answering chat and phone at once unless your routing system knows to turn one off. So they're not getting a chat and a phone call delivered at the same time. Maybe they're doing phones and emails. Maybe they're doing chats and emails. Maybe they're doing chats and SMS. So some delayed social there. Then how I built this, and this is something that we did at Stripe, is we would build each one of these queues, like I said, independently, get the total workload hours, sum that up. Each one of those queues can have their own hours of operation. Maybe one is a sub hours of operation and it's not open as much as the other one. You sum that up to the total and it gives you that weekly need of hours, which of course we turn into headcount because not everybody speaks in hours like we do. And then you have your staff measured up against that, the entirety of all the different things they would be doing and going from there. This does get very complicated if you have subsets of groups where some agents do some multi-skill and some agents do single skills. So, we're trying to get as close as possible, and maybe we can only get the workload, and the staffing part is a harder one to get to, but we'll do our best. We can stack these on top of each other. I can walk people through if they need to on how to kind of expand this out to multiple lines of business. It does do a lot of calculations, so I hope your computer was built recently and it's not going to melt afterwards. But lots of different things to go down, and great questions. And if you have any thoughts on how to change this, send them to us. Send them to me. I am not above taking other people's opinions and thoughts and things on here and giving credit and then making that into a better version. Like, we all need to learn from the experience here because not one of us knows everything. All right. And Sam, I think it looks like you answered some of these in text. Have we covered them all? I don't want to skip anybody before I jump back in.
I do believe we are good to continue from here, but thanks, Adrian, for diving in on all of those great questions, and thanks for the folks at home for sending those our way. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. Okay, so back to the basics. Even though we jumped ahead a little bit, let's not forget to cover our basics. We're going to eat our vegetables here. We've done customer base, and now we're going to do CPC, contacts per customers. Don't be like me and fall into the trap of just trying to throw acronyms out as well. Expand those acronyms out so people know what you're talking about. But CPC, in this way, we are just going to take and figure out what percentage of that eligible customer base to be serviced contacted us week over week. So you can see in this example and in the other sheet that we were just in, it's a very small percentage, because hopefully if you've got 10 million customers or 100 million customers or whatever it might be, it's a fraction of them that I have to contact in every week. Because if not, that's very expensive. And then there's probably something going on with your product if people need to have a human interaction every week. So you put your CPC in there, and this can just be as easily found out as going back and saying, okay, what was my total inbound volume for last week, the week before, yada, yada, and what was our customer base for those weeks, and doing the math and figuring out your CPC. Once again, you can run a static CPC and say, we expect our customers are going to be 0.2% week over week. Or what I like to do is you go through and look at specific weeks going back and change it if it's up, if it's higher or lower, because this is where you can sneak in your volume forecast seasonality, where maybe back to school, it's higher. Maybe around the holidays, it's higher. And then right after Christmas, it drops like a rock because everybody's using that unlimited PTO we were talking about. And they're all doing things that are more fun than staring at spreadsheets all day. So then it drops off, you bake that into there, and then you adjust. We've talked about this many times before, but this is not a set it and forget it. You should be looking at this, I'll say probably about once a month, if not maybe a little bit more frequently, to adjust and go from there. So CPC, another super important one. We've only gotten a couple lines into the spreadsheet, a couple rows into the spreadsheet, but we covered a lot here. So on the quiz here, we probably kind of answered all the questions that I was going to ask on the quiz, but if we look back at what we've already learned, can somebody tell me what are the outputs that you're looking for from capacity planning? Can anybody put that in the chat? And there's a bunch of chats I haven't caught up on, so I'm guessing that some of those are going to come in. FTE, that's a great one. And then hours on the as the counterpart to that. FTE, great. And I see a couple other people typing here as well. Hours cost, perfect.
Also on that vein, Adrian, we actually have a poll with a very similar question there, so we can release that as well.
Yep. Yes, please. Send out the polls, answer in any way, and we'll take the information. So let's jump in now to a little bit more and talk about the AHT forecasting, average handle time. As we all know, average handle time should contain, what are like the three main things it should contain? I'm going to tell you, but I'll give you a chance to write it out too. It's the actual time that you are talking or interacting with that customer. It is the hold time. And then it is the after work, after call, after chat, after SMS, after Twitter, whatever the after time is, where you have to do a little bit of work on the account before you're ready to serve again. Got to have all those in there at the minimum. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time. So we are looking at the AHT, average handle time. We've got our baseline or our goal, whichever you want to go with. This is something that we just talked about, but you can set that as a static in the spreadsheet. You can also go in and say, you know what, static's not good enough. I actually have a really good pulse on how this might go up and down. So we can adjust that with seasonality in here as well. I did break this one out a little bit to have like a seasonality modifier, or you just change your baseline and get rid of seasonality. I don't care. I just want to know that you're doing it and somehow, and tell me how you're doing it and how you like it. It's up to you how you get there. You'll probably pull this from Assembled, or if you're not using Assembled and you're using something else that handles all of your contacts, you'll go through and pull your average handle time from there. And then make sure you're grabbing the average handle time, ideally, specifically on your tenured agents. You know, if you have a lot of new hire agents, if you can kind of break them out as well, so you can get the idea of what a tenured agent does in handle time. And then you plug that into the system here. The additional layers as well are your seasonality and then your new hires in the model that we have coming up. The seasonality, and we'll go into the launch here as well, kind of the extra modifiers. Go on to that. The new hires, just to make it a little bit more simple, don't impact it as much, but it's something that can be changed and updated as you see fit. And you go through and you'll see it modifies the actual amount. The calculations happen in the back end, and you get your output there as well. So those are the two big ingredients you need to mix together to get your actual workload that you're going to need. And then beyond that, we go and say, all right, in workforce, great, we're done. We washed our hands of it. We've got this perfect capacity plan. We got our perfect forecast comes out. And then marketing, and Val's on the marketing team. So Val comes along and says, oh, we're actually going to do this initiative coming up. And yeah, sorry, can you change your plans? And it'll probably come on a Friday at about 3:00 when you get that information. Not from Val. She's better about doing that earlier on in the week. But that's usually when it comes in. So you want to be ready for that. So we've built in the ability to plug in launches. You can do this by having different rows for each launch, or you can kind of just say, here's a launch that happens for these weeks and the next one goes along, whatever you choose in the spreadsheet. But these are going to be your modifiers that take volume up, take volume down, take handle time up, take it down, and then you give it an output. The thing that I will say here is when you are getting these sort of launches, when you're getting this from the marketing team, whoever it is, have them come to you and say, we specifically think it's going to be this much volume and then this much incremental handle time for this many contacts. You want them to give you those numbers, and then you want them to actually be tracking it. So when you go back and somebody's like, hey, you missed service level last week, and you say, yeah, but the launch said 10,000 contacts, and it was actually 50,000, and they each took 10 minutes longer than we thought. That's not on you as workforce, because you're working with the numbers you have. That's kind of on the marketing team or whoever is doing this to have a better idea of their forecast in the future. And you're just working with the information you've got. Of course, as we're a team together, you're going to help them out forecasting in the future, but don't take that on all yourself. And, just be aware that you need to have these modifiers and ideally track them actuals as well. So now this is when I was planning to jump into the spreadsheet, because we'll go over, workload and FTE. We've already seen it. We've already kind of ruined the surprise I was waiting for there, but that's great. As I jump over, let me take a breather, drink some water. And did any other questions come in? None?
No new questions came in, but probably worth flagging a really awesome idea that came in from Nate over at Klaviyo. Thanks for sharing. A super nice addition to the spreadsheet would be the cost of not hiring and putting some level of cost premium for overtime needed to answer these questions. I thought that this was really insightful. Someone that's kind of had to make the case around hiring myself. The leadership teams, that's also not always around just the capacity plan, but also somewhat around the cost of inaction is also important too. So really appreciate this idea, Nate, and we'll definitely be noodling on it for our next capacity plan.
Yeah, that is a great one. I did not include costs in here, right? The cost, you can just say, okay, the amount of hours of staffing I have times my rate, whatever you want to put in there. But this is a live spreadsheet, so I might, go ahead and add that in there. And if that's the case, you'll be able to follow the link. You'll see that it's version 1.1 and then the new date, and you can pull it down from there. Great idea, because there's the cost of tenured, and then there's the cost of overtime. So if you said maybe my deficits here of my staffing. So here's my delta hours, which we will cover in a little bit. If I wanted to cover that 100% with overtime, and overtime's paid at like a 1.75 multiplier, then that's a lot of money. Or we could hire. You can get around that better. So great call out. I saw a couple more things come in. Was there another question that popped up?
Yes, we did receive one more. Has Adrian already shared the spreadsheet? And on that one, I believe we haven't shared it out yet, but it will be going out after the end of this webinar. So be keeping an eye on that in your inbox. Val, do you have any extra details there?
No, you covered it perfectly. An email will be sent promptly after with the link.
Great.
Awesome. Keep the great questions coming, folks. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so let's jump in and let's look at this live here as well. So starting from what we had before, we've got a lot of inputs that we got to start in. So in the slide that I was talking about, of course, that's all in theory, right? But then you want to start and you want to get something going here. So we have included a nice instructions tab. I want to make it very clear, this sheet is locked. So it's in the title, it's green, it's in here as well. When you open this up, just make a copy to your own drive. Then you can do whatever you want with it. You can put dragons on it, you can delete things, I don't care. But then the template will still be there and you can modify it. And then you jump in. Anything in yellow basically is something that you are going to need to adjust as the end user. And if we're all following along, it's not just adjust once. It's an ongoing process. You go back and you tweak and you update from there. Little pro tip before we dive in as well. It's not the worst idea in the world to make 2 copies of these sheets. One where you plot in actuals. So your actual volume, your actual handle time, your actual staffing, so on and so forth, to get the actual workload that you needed to have, and then the actual staffing deficits at the weekly level, roughly, right? When you go down to intervals in real life, it's not exactly the same. And you can tab back and forth between. You can have, my planning one and then my actuals, and see, as we're breaking it down, what were the things that drove the actuals? Was it something in my control? Was it something outside of my control? And go from there. So that's my pro tip. The Google Drive space is pretty cheap. Make a couple copies, keep an actual versus a planned one. All right. Well, when we start in going from top to bottom, you got to set a start week for your model here. Pretty basic. You do it. It's going to adjust all the weeks going forward. Like I said, this has gone out for 52 weeks, but you can adjust from there. And then since we're focusing on one queue, and yes, we're focusing on one queue that is a little bit more of the traditional, it is the queue with a staff group that is staffed against it versus some of the multi-channel, omni-channel environments. You're going to start off with your SLA target, your first response target, big ones here. We do need to have the starting headcount. So in this model, since we are plotting in weekly attrition and then plotting in new hires, which I'll touch on just a little bit, but we'll cover more next time, you need to have a starting headcount, and then the model will take that forward and say, okay, here's where I expect you to be based off of the other inputs that you've gotten in. One of them being your annual attrition. I plugged in 50% just so you can see it change something. Hopefully it's not 50% for you. And then you'll need to plug in some other information about your staffing. We covered this a little bit already, but the total weekly hours that you have them plotted for in there. You are planning their lunch. You might get up to 42.5 hours, plot that in. The shrinkage to reduce them down by, because we have a shrinkage percentage. And then I don't remember who asked it, but it is a great point about occupancy, where you can maybe inflate this a little bit above to also have some occupancy in there as well. Maybe add another 5 or 10% to reduce the occupancy of your agents. Annual attrition. And then these ones I'll cover just a little bit, but basically we'll cover more next week. How many weeks are your agents, your new hire agents, going to be in training in class? And then for each of those weeks, how many hours are they going to spend in ticketing? So I know when I was at T-Mobile, yes, there was our ability to get faster, but also we would have a pre-planned of, okay, you will be in the classroom for most of the week, but you're going to get maybe 7.5 hours, 10 hours a week of on the phones every single week to kind of help out with that queue, and more importantly, to get that experience. So lots of inputs there. The other ones here, customer base, this should not be a surprise here. Customer base going across. CPC, once again, something that you can change. And this is where things will get a little tricky. We're going to see if this will calculate for us live as we're presenting. But as you adjust that, you'll see that your workload hours, anything is going to be updating. And on the back end, it's actually doing the math for you. There we go. No more error, Google. This gives you your volume. It's not in yellow, so you don't need to adjust it. Your handle time baseline, your seasonality. So just what we talked about before. And then your launch volume here. So this is that launch, this is that incentive. You can change the names over here, a bold, whatever you want. But let's say it was 100 contacts, or maybe we'll do a couple weeks later, we're going to have 250 contacts, and they're all going to have 50 seconds of incremental AHT. But you can see the system will layer on those 250 contacts, give you more total volume, and then it's going to do a weighted amount of your handle time with the 50 seconds of incremental. Now, real quick to point out here as well, once again, not one size fits all. This is built to do incremental increases. So those 250 contacts are 852 seconds, 800 plus the 50 here. But there are some incentives or some launches that might come out and say, we are doing self-help and we expect, overall, it's going to drop all of our contacts by 20 seconds. This formula is not going to grab it, but it is something that can be added in. Or if you're comfortable with the formulas, you can change that as well and adjust it as you need to. And then I like to, maybe this is the old school part of me, I like to kind of show a little bit of the work as we go along. So you get your total volume, total AHT, and you get your workload hours that you're going to start to work against there. So that is the majority of the setup that you need. The other tab is, and I know there's a lot of tabs and a lot of cells, so I'll pause here in just a second for any other questions. But the other tab is obviously the arrival pattern. This is a line of business that is set to open at midnight and stop at 5 p.m. at their local time and not have any weekend or any night hours. The one major thing that you need to plan for here, there's two major things. You need to make sure that these percentages equal up to 100% so that you have all of your volume represented for the entire week. If you don't have 100%, it's not going to give you an error. It's still going to do the math. You will just have a workload that is under what is described. And then Erlang, at least the Erlang that I'm using in this, will basically say that for any hour, if there is any contacts coming in at all, it's going to put a person there. So let's say you had a 24/7 queue and you put it in here, but it was super small volume. And, maybe over Saturday you had on average 0.001 calls or something. Just be aware that Erlang says, if you are open and your queue is open to accept calls, I want you to put at least one person in there, and that's minimum. You might even need to put 2 for shrinkage. So it'll give you like a baseline that you need to crazy inflate your numbers there. So just something to be aware of. If you have super small numbers, you might see like, this is higher than I thought. It's just Erlang being Erlang at small numbers.
And one thing I'd also like to take the opportunity to flag here really quickly is that for the purposes of this particular sheet, we're defining shrinkage a little bit differently than the way we define shrinkage inside of our queue configuration page inside of Assembled that some folks here might be familiar with. So did want to flag that inside of our tool in Assembled, when you're thinking about shrinkage, we're thinking about time that somebody is assigned to be working a productive event and the time that they might lose to all the little humaning things that happen in a day, like petting a dog, checking a new tab, all those little off-task things that can happen. But it's specific to time that they are scheduled to be productive when we're talking about inside of Assemble. So in our case, inside of the tool, we don't think about shrinkage in the same way as you would in this tool, which would be thinking about things like callouts and other things that we don't think about for our queue configuration with the current fields. So just wanted to highlight that this is thinking about shrinkage in a more traditional sense, whereas inside of Assembled, we think about shrinkage as specific to time that people are scheduled to be productive. So just a small little call out there, and of course, happy to answer any questions about that offline, because I know it's a little bit of a fire hose of sudden inside of tool information. And with that, Adrian, do you mind if we actually pause here for a few great user questions?
I was checking them, and there looks like there's some good ones. Hit me with them.
Yeah, let's go for it. So kicking us off the gate here, do you find any limitations with having your capacity file in a Google Doc versus being in an Excel file?
Okay, great question. The answer to this is yes. And so full transparency here, I found the formulas that do the Erlang calculations. They're out there on the internet that somebody else had already made. They had converted from Excel, I believe, over to Google Sheets. And I found those and used them. They're still the same. The person that actually put those in there is quoted as doing that. But I'm pretty sure that if you export this to Excel, the macro that does the backend is not going to work, just because I don't think there's a very good transport back and forth. That being said, the formula to do this is the equal agents formula, literally just the word agents. So if you are a guru on this, you can jump in to the actual script, maybe find that one, and then recreate it in Excel and have it called the same sort of thing. I personally don't have the skills to do that quickly, so we use what we already had. Well, that's a great one there.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you, Adrian. On to the next one. Are there any alterations you have to make in your file for daylight savings time? March loses an hour, and November, of course, has a duplicate hour.
Yeah. Ideally, in a perfect world, yes. But remember, we're working at the weekly sort of view. So that 1 hour in the grand scheme of things is not going to be probably like, a life or death sort of thing. The difference between you meeting or not meeting service level, if you run a very, very small contact center, this capacity planning, like a lot of workforce things, unfortunately, it gets harder to do at smaller volumes. You get the benefits of scale in a lot of things in workforce planning just by having that. Averages work out better, weighted averages, historicals. So for this, I would say don't worry about it. Go through those weeks. Obviously, you might want to change your arrival pattern. Probably isn't going to make that big of a deal being shifted 1 hour up or back afterwards. It's just kind of getting the overall hoops in there. But feel free, play around with it. If you run across it and you say, I adjusted this and I see something that's absolutely crazy with my patterns here. I haven't tested every iteration, but it should be rounding error close. But if not, give that feedback and we can work through a solution there too.
Awesome. Cool. One more here. Does this file have an option for waiting new hire AHT ramp, or would that be done outside the model in this case?
Yeah, that's I see that one's from Rachel. So another great one, Rachel. This one, just to make it simple, is just saying the actual staffing that will come in is turned into hours from your new hires. So yes and no. Does it count that? Basically, it's saying out of your 5 new hires that I plotted in here, now we're getting into the next session as well, but we'll cover it again. Out of the 5 new hires, we expect them to each give 7.5 hours per week of ticketing time. So specifically, it is not saying that their handle times are longer and therefore their output is lower. But if you can do the math, you can do it on the back end and say, I know this is, an extra Band-Aid workaround. You can say, all right, maybe they're going to do 10 hours a week of ticketing time, but I know they take twice as long as a tenured agent to do it. So in the model, I'm only going to say they do 5 hours a week of ticketing time, because effectively they're giving me half of the output. It's not perfect, but that's why we're working at 1,000-foot view at the week instead of the actual specific intervals. I'll actually noodle on that as well and see if there's a better way to at least show or give that sort of input, or better way to work into the model. Or even better, you can send me an email at adrian@assembledhq.com and we can chat through it and see if you have an idea. We can work with it and maybe publish it into the live version as well.
Awesome. And one more question here coming in from Matt. For a multi-channel environment, you could just have a spreadsheet for each channel, right? That would give you FTE that you could then spread out over your agents. So if phone had a required FTE of 5.25 and tickets had an FTE of 3.5, you'd need to have 9 agents to cover both queues.
Yes.
So what do you think of that, Adrian?
Yes, Matt, you have been paying attention and I appreciate it. That is exactly what I was getting to with kind of having, if you had multiple queues, so either multiple queues in the same sheet with their own calculation tabs, or multiple sheets that are doing the calculations, and then you sum it up. So that is exactly what I was talking about. It'll get you there for the weekly view, so you get an idea from it. Obviously the interval, it gets a little bit more complicated, but it's a perfect way to do it, and it's a great way to do it without having to change any sort of formulas. The Google Sheet space is pretty cheap. Make as many of these as you want and just keep them updated and sum it up from there. We can even talk about importing ranges between different sheets if you need to have like an overall dashboard sheet that pulls things in. Lots of things we can chat through.
Awesome. And seeing one more great question from Arpan. How would we cater for overtime hours here in the model?
Yep. So another great one, and that's not the first time now that we've heard overtime. So I think I might make an adjustment to that. So just keep an eye on the spreadsheet as you use it. But basically in the actual staffing that we have, so your staff gets reduced by your attrition, by your shrinkage, your productive hours. Just put in an area and say you can manually plot in overtime. We can have a formula that says, fill overtime to maybe 90% of your deficit, whatever it might be. And you can see your overtime that you have to solve for and go from there. Good point. That's the second time it's been brought up, so I will definitely noodle on some of those adjustments as well. But in the meantime, since y'all have access to it, if you have an adjustment that works and looks really good, shoot it my way, and I'm happy to look at it and give credit if it rolls out into the official version here.
And we have one more question come in from Pope. How do you cater for an Excel-based schedule that has multiple loops mid the schedule? Loops are not feeding. Oh wait, this would probably be easier if I click the start question button. Sorry about that. How do you cater for an Excel-based schedule that has multiple loops mid the schedule? Loops are not feeding back into the planning system, and we can't track and trace the conformance. From South Africa. Difficult scenario to type out. Hope the question makes sense.
Loops are not. I'm not sure that I 100% understand this one, but it sounds like it is impacting the actual amount of staffing that person's getting and not on the workload side. Maybe this is one that we can take offline just because it does sound like a tough one to type out. But I'd be happy to tackle that one offline. I love to find these little edge cases and these craziness because workforce is so different in everybody's line of business. So let's take that one offline. Maybe shoot over an email. You can respond. Our emails will come out in the whatever. We're going to send out the recording and the sheet as well after this.
Yeah, absolutely happy to dive into any one specific use case offline. So please keep the questions coming.
Okay. And I see there's a lot going on in the chat. We only have a couple minutes left here. So just wanted to kind of give a recap and then let everybody go actually on time, because at least for me, it's about to be lunchtime in Mountain Standard Time. So it's important. But we got to start off with getting your forecasts in for your volume, specifically the volume forecast we're going to start off with. We start off with customer base. We layer on contacts per customer. We get our volumes. That's all outlined here. We also set our targets for our SLA so that we can have Erlang actually do this on the back end. We set our model up with a start week. This is set up for next week so that if you wanted to jump in and go with it, you can start building out from there. You'll get your AHT baseline and your seasonality if you want to make that go higher or lower and get some seasonality built into there. You can also capture seasonality in your CPC, your contacts per customer, if you have the ability to track that kind of week over week with something that you trust as the variations. Your launches, important to have those launches. Marketing's always doing something. Sales is always doing something to adjust your forecast. You plot those in here. That'll help build out to the overall workload that you need. And then you get the hours. The system's going to do all this for you. So you can sit back for 30 seconds or so while it calculates, get yourself a drink of coffee, and you're not busting out the calculator to do it. You get the nice workload. Your boss is like, wow, this is actually built for every single hour over the entire year summed up. And you're like, yeah, it's no big deal, but I'm gonna need a raise here. That's all done for you. It's all built out automatically. And then your staffing, which we'll cover more next time, is when we start to say, okay, we're actually going to see as we're starting to dwindle down. The deltas here show, are we understaffed in hours? Are we understaffed in headcount? And then, of course, plotting in the new hires, which this system will automatically, and I'll just give a sneak peek for next time. Let's say you had a class of 10 new hires starting. It's going to go through, calculate exactly how many new hires week over week, even if they overlap, send them out for the amount of weeks that we put in our new hire training weeks, and then put them into actual productive headcount when they graduate from there. And it does that once again, all automatically. So your bosses and everybody will be like, oh, this is amazing. Like, yeah, it takes me hours and hours to do while you're really able to grab a coffee and relax a little bit. So that's the recap there. I think I'm going to pause it here and maybe let Val or Sam, if there's any other questions, or we can wrap it up and get ready to send things out to everybody.
Sam, I was going to say, if there are any final questions, maybe we can address those and then we can close out.
Yeah, of course. Any last questions that folks want to get in for the road, feel free to drop them into the questions tab, and we'll see what we can wrap up with here live.
Yeah. And the nice thing is, this is not a speak now or forever hold your peace. Hopefully we'll be seeing most, if not all of you again in about a week to go over some more of this. And we will be having a good chunk of time on the recap of what we cover here, because that recap's going to really help solidify it. And then if there's any changes or adjustments that people have or that we have as well, and go from there. So looks like maybe no other questions popped in.
Yeah, we must have done a great job answering everyone's questions along the way, because it looks like we're dried up there. But thank you guys so much for all of your awesome questions and just being here with us today, going through all this fun stuff. And as Adrian noted, of course, this isn't just an online conversation. It's totally an offline conversation as well. So feel free to get in touch with Adrian and I, or anyone else on our team, if you'd like to chat through any of this in more detail. And looking forward to seeing you guys for the part 2, the sequel, coming soon.
Yes, and I've also actually just released a poll if you all want to stay in the loop and continue the conversation. Our team always loves hearing more about your viewpoints in the industry and your day-to-day, and also riff on product and roadmap feedback. So just release that and we'll continue the conversation if you're interested. But thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. See you in a week.